Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Scott Jeffrey Miller. Scott is the former Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership for the FranklinCovey company. Amongst many skills, Scott is a keynote speaker, the #1 best-selling author, and the host of the renowned FranklinCovey On Leadership podcast. Having been recruited by Dr. Stephen Covey's team, and being the host of this leading podcast, Scott has met and worked with many of the most successful and aspirational leaders of our time. It fills me with great pride that Scott has given me this time to share his thoughts with us. Today, we're going to discuss the actions and behaviours needed to build self-confidence. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Scott onto the podcast. Hello, Scott.
Dave, what an honor to be here. Thank you for the platform. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So, Scott, for those of my listeners who may not be familiar with yourself or Stephen Covey, would you mind sharing a little of your incredible career background and the purpose of the FranklinCovey company?
Sure. So although I live here in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the States, in the Mountain West, I'm originally from the East Coast, Florida. Was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, went to college there and worked for the Walt Disney Company for 4 years, where they invited me to leave, which you can figure out what that means. So I was then recruited by Dr. Stephen R. Covey and the FranklinCovey to move out west. And so I've been an associate of the FranklinCovey company for 26 years now. Started at the front line as a salesperson and then worked my way up to the C-suite, where I was the Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership for nearly a decade. I now host their podcast, which is the world's largest weekly leadership podcast, hitting about 7 million every Tuesday. The FranklinCovey company is, in my measure, the world's most influential leadership development firm. We're a public global company based here in Salt Lake City with offices in, close to 60 countries around the world. We were founded by the gentleman you mentioned, Stephen R. Covey. He, of course, is the author behind the seminal, incomparable book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book has sold nearly 50 million copies over 30 years, translated into literally 100 languages. And I was privileged to serve as his chief marketing officer. And myself, I've been privileged to write 4 or 5 best-selling books, have a couple dozen more in the works over the coming decade plus, and delighted to talk leadership with you today.
Fantastic. As you mentioned, you're obviously a prolific author. Marketing, management, and leadership books are clearly your thing. And I've recently published a new book called Master Mentors, 30 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. Now, I've read that twice. I plan to read it again. It's absolutely crammed full of gems of information and knowledge. For people who haven't discovered this book yet, would you mind explaining why you felt compelled to create and share this book and what impact you hope this and your future books in this series will make to its readers?
Well, I'm just still stuck on the fact that you've read it more than once, Dave. So thank you for that. I think you're the first person. This is a book that is based on the podcast that I host for FranklinCovey. It's called On Leadership with Scott Miller. And not so dissimilar to your podcast, I'm privileged to sit in the interviewer's chair each week and interview people that are quite significant in terms of their contribution. They could be a best-selling author, a business titan, a celebrity, CEO, or perhaps someone that isn't a household name, but they've done some research or they've survived even a tragedy or some life setback where there is an insight to share with the rest of us. So after 150 interviews, I started to realize, Dave, like you again, that so often the nuggets, the real gold that comes out in the interviews happens off air. Either happens, just after the interview closes or in the green room or when we're talking as friends. And so with their permission, I published a book called Master Mentors that is now available worldwide, and it's being translated into multiple languages, where I take 30 of my favorite interviews, and with their permission, I share a different transformational insight that each of them has taught me on or off air. And then I share, a story about how maybe I struggled with it or someone else perfected it. And this became the book Master Mentors, which is the first book in a 10-volume series. I've just finished writing Master Mentors Volume 2 with 30 new mentors, 30 new insights. And I'm now writing Volume 3 on my way to Volume 10. And so when I'm done, there'll be 300 mentors and 300 insights. Not all of them are profound to everyone. My sense is that each mentor will hit someone differently where they are in their life. It's fairly episodic. I write about, mental health, physical health, marketing, branding, gratitude, and everything kind of in between. It's very intentionally meant to hit each reader differently based on where they are on their own personal and professional journey.
Perfect. I must warn the listeners, there will be a consequence of reading the book, though. That means that you will need to get some money out, because now I've discovered about 30 other new books I need to, if I haven't already read, go and buy. So be warned. For those people listening, be warned. Be prepared to spend some more money. Whilst reading, obviously, your latest book, I recognize some similar personal challenges that I believe you've experienced that perhaps mirror some of my own. From a child, I suffered with a significant stammer, and that had a huge impact on my childhood and early career. It was only at an event forced upon me in some ways by the tutor when I was a technical apprentice that suddenly triggered something in my head, and I was able to, I won't say talk stammer free, but fairly close in comparison to where I've been. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm super keen to talk to you about gaining confidence. As persons suffering from perhaps speech impediments, other confidence challenges, need support and guidance to help them sort of develop and gain self-control. And I'm seeing so many people struggling to blossom in their personal and careers. They could be introverts by nature, and they're overwhelmed by the fear of ridicule, rejection, intimidation, that kind of thing. So would you tell us a little of perhaps your story and how you take control or took control of your challenges and become a confident speaker?
What a lovely question, and what a beautiful opening when you shared about your own, like me, speech impediment. In the US, we call it a stutter. I'm guessing in Europe, perhaps it's a stammer. And I'm not an expert on speech pathology. There's lots of different types of reasons why people might have a speech impediment, including a stutter. Some are neurological, physiological, psychological. But that's not your question, right? Your question really is, I think it centers around vulnerability. You see, Dave, after 30 years in the leadership development industry, I've come to be convinced that vulnerability is a competency. It's a leadership strength. Having the ability to talk about your challenges, to share openly the things that you struggle with as a teaching moment. One of my first books was called Management Mess to Leadership Success. And I talked about openly 30 leadership and management challenges I had in my life. Some were horrifying, blush-worthy, probably termination-worthy had I not had great leaders that, gave me a second or third chance. But what I realized is that the best leaders own their messes. The best friends, the best confidants, the best people, they just own their mess, because when you own your mess, you make it safe for others to own theirs. I think actually the best leaders, the best teachers are those that teach through their own challenges, their own mistakes, their own struggles, their triumphs. And so I would say to anybody that feels like they're lacking self-confidence, whether it is through, self-body image, through your ability to articulate yourself well, your ability to write well, to speak well, whatever your ability to understand business, talk about it, talk it up. Don't use it as an excuse. Use it as your superpower. One of my favorite interviews in the book Master Mentors is from a woman named Ann Chow. She is the first ever non-white, non-male CEO of AT&T, one of the largest, telecommunication companies in the world. And Ann is, extraordinarily well educated. She's one of Fortune magazine's most powerful women in business. And she often says this phrase, Scott, I don't know about that. Teach me about that. I mean, here's a woman at the pinnacle of her career, best-selling author. I mean, she's going to become a household name in business in the next decade or so. And one of her favorite phrases is, I don't know about that. Teach me about that. You see, she uses humility as a strength. She is confident enough to show humility, to show vulnerability. So I hope this is an answer to your broad question. And that is, I love to hang a lantern on my problems. Like metaphorically, I talk about them before someone else chooses to, because some people will weaponize your vulnerabilities against you. Those are bad people, and stay away from them. You'll encounter them, but don't play to them and don't be minimized by them. I talk openly about my stutter. I talk about a lot of my challenges, not to the point to where it's a fatiguing or a workplace confessional. I know your audience, know your place, but I use them as a chance to sometimes give me permission to make some mistakes, but also to tell everybody else, heck, if I can have a podcast, so can you. Trust me. If I can write a book, so can you. If I can host a radio program, you can too. You gotta be confident in what you're passionate about and talk openly about your struggles, identify them, work through them, because I'll tell you, you will build a level of loyalty with your vulnerability that you can't imagine.
Fantastic. Really good response. Thank you.
Long answer. I apologize.
No, that's brilliant. The next challenge for a lot of people in their careers is when they have to engage and present to both small but also large audiences. How do you prepare for such events? And how do you overcome your fears, perhaps your feelings and emotions, if they're starting to get out of control?
Sure. I'll tell you my journey, and it may or may not be, resonant with everyone, but I have a very large vocabulary, and I'm happy to state that because I have been reading 40 magazines and 3 newspapers every day, every week for 35 years. I'm a voracious reader. I don't learn how to speak better by listening to television or podcast or radio or whatever, the modality is. I do all of that as entertainment and education. But if I want to be in control of the words that I'm using and feel confident in my presentation, my persuasion, my influence skills, I chose to build my vocabulary. I heard once someone say that you can only think as deep or as broad as your vocabulary is deep. You can only think as wide as your vocabulary is deep. And that really struck me. So I really worked on building my word choices as a stutterer, as a stammerer. I found that one of the best ways for me to recover from a stutter word, there's about 40 words I can't say in public. And so I had to have lots of alternatives, some that work better than others. And so, as a fellow stutterer, we have to have on-ramps and off-ramps, like a highway, right? When I know a word's coming up that I can't say in public, I have to have 4 or 5 alternatives. And I know this is coming, a sentence or 2 out. And so I worked really hard on building my vocabulary. I've worked hard on my presentation skills. I have a coach. I have a presentation coach that I go to several times a year, and we rent a large stadium audience or a large theater. And she works on my hand gestures, my eye contacts, my movement. She works on how deliberately I we call it walk and plant so that I'm not using my nervous energy on stage through my body. I have a lot of props. So I don't use PowerPoint slides or Keynote. I use card decks, like literally playing card decks. So for all of my books, your viewers can't see this, but I create a card deck for all of my books that I give for presentations. And so people can hold these in their hands, and so can I. And it allows me to have something in my hands that I can be using so my hands aren't, covering up my groin area called the fig leaf, which is a very common, right? Or hitting my microphone or whatever it is. So I've learned a lot of tips and techniques. Most experts make it look easy. Most novices think it's easy. The best speakers in the world have practiced and practiced and practiced, including myself. I mean, I've spoken to audiences as small as 0, like literally no one showed up to my breakout session at a conference. No one showed up, to as big as, 7,000 people in, football arenas. So I would say with people, on this one, practice makes perfect, right? Is work on it, become more comfortable, present to your family in your living room, present to your office mates, present to your friends at Starbucks, right? Go outside and walk around the block in a garden and give your speech to one of your friends while you're walking and become more comfortable. I've become pretty good about my cadence, knowing when to speak softer and slower and with more intention, and when to speak real loud and how to land a point. I'm quite uncomfortable with silence. So I've learned how to use the power of silence to get people to think about something before I move on to a new point. So all this comes with lots of practice. The greatest speakers I know spend probably 4 times as much practice time than they do on stage in front of clients. For every hour on stage, they spend 4 times practicing for their speeches. So don't be too intimidated. And by the way, most people aren't judging you as hard as you think they are. Just have fun, enjoy, connect to your audience, and admit your mistakes, including admit you're nervous. Open up and say, oh my gosh, I'm super nervous. I might pee my pants. So if you see a wet stain down my leg, you know what it is, just move on. I mean, people would laugh their you-know-what off and fall in love with you. Just be real.
That's great. I hope
that may sound outrageous. That may sound outrageous. But if a speaker said to me, I'm really nervous and I might pee my pants. So if you see a wet stain down my leg, you'll know what's going on. I would laugh my ass off, stand up and give them a standing ovation right then and there to know I'm here for you. So don't be scared.
Certainly an icebreaker.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned a few things there, but you talked about, we mentioned about successful people, those that are people that are famous and who people look up to. And they always appear to be comfortable with social interaction and the public eye, but that doesn't always necessarily be the case. So from your experience, are there many successful, nervous introverts? And if so, what kind of tools and techniques do you think they use to overcome and manage their inner demons?
I think it's a fallacy to think that these people that you see on stage and at conferences on television aren't nervous. I mean, I have spoken at many significant conferences in front of, 5, 10,000 people. If you would go backstage and you would see what these people are doing in terms of their rituals, their prayers, them throwing up, pacing, the things they do to get prepared. What you see on stage is not happening behind stage. So I'll tell you, I think the best people are those that do get nervous because they don't take the audience for granted. They recognize that they have to re-earn the audience's respect and trust every time. Sometimes I'll tell you, I've spoken thousands of times in my career to large audiences, and I'm never really nervous. But I'll tell you, when I started to speak about my books, for some reason, Dave, it happened to me 4 or 5 times in a row. About 3 minutes before I went on stage, I started to feel like I had the flu. Like all of a sudden, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got the flu. And then as soon as I got on stage, it went away. And you know what? It was nerves. And I'm not a naturally nervous person. I'm actually a fairly overconfident person, if anything. But then I started to realize what it was. And my speech coach told me that's a good thing. It shows you've got a conscience. It shows you care. It shows that that's the right, that you want to do a good job. You don't just want to phone it in and give the same speech you've given to everybody else. So to be nervous is natural. And I think the best thing to do is just talk about it. Walk out and say, good morning, everyone. I cannot tell you how nervous I am right now. I want to make sure that our time together is valuable. So forgive me if I have to find myself or I lose my place. It's because I care about. You get the point, right? It's just
absolutely.
Tell the truth. Don't fake it. Just tell the truth and you will endear people so much to yourself. It doesn't mean that you distract them or, weapon or use that, as a crutch. Don't do that, but find your spot. And I think it's totally fine. If you lose your train of thought, say, you know what? I'm so excited to be here today. And today I'm kind of nervous. I've kind of lost my train of thought. Where was I? I don't care if you're in the C-suite, if you're in front of church, if you're in front of a mosque or a synagogue or an audience at an outdoor concert. I don't know about you, but if someone said that to me, I would just smile and say, I like this person. This is a real person.
Yeah.
Just, own your strengths and own your weaknesses. And don't be afraid in a moment of nervousness to say, can I just tell you, I'm super nervous right now. I lost my train of thought. Please forgive me. Where was I? Can anybody feed me my life? People will die laughing and they will love that. It will increase your credibility, not decrease it.
Yeah, and it shows you're being natural and honest with people. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Absolutely. One of the things that I certainly suffer with is sometimes I get a lot of chatter in my head. And when that happens, your ability to be effective and confident sometimes can take a knock. So you tend to overthink and dwell on scenarios and probably think of things that could go wrong. And therefore you get some strong negative emotions and feelings. So what insights can you share that may help the less confident seek to break this potentially disruptive cycle that goes on in one's head?
Well, it's probably different for each person, right? I mean, I don't usually think about the things that are going to go wrong because I'm a fairly well-prepared person. I don't use PowerPoint, so I don't care if the projector goes wrong or the light bulbs go off. I don't tend to rely on a lot of things other than myself. And so I prepare a lot. I make sure I know my content well, because at the end of the day, whether the microphone goes off or the lights go out or whatever, your time gets cut short, if you know your content, that's what matters most. So I would argue to people, don't spend your precious time on your slide deck, on your advancer. Spend all your time knowing your stories. Tell your stories well. If you're giving a speech or a presentation, maybe divide it into some easily memorizable parts. Like there's 3 parts or only 4 parts. So if you know you're in part 1, you know you only have 20 minutes left, you've got to move it to part 2 and then move to part 3. I tend to give most of my speeches in segments in my mind. I know I've got 3 sections or I've got 7 sections. And if I have 90 minutes, I got to spend about, 12 minutes on each section. And if I go a little long, I got to cut one short. So I usually have a structure and an architecture. I don't use notes, but like I said, I use these cards, which by the way, I think notes are fine. If you have notes, don't have them on a piece of paper where it flops around. Have it on a little card, like a cardboard piece of paper, something firm. Maybe put it on a stool or put it on a high boy, kind of bar table. It's totally fine to come back to your notes. If you are going to use a slide presentation, make sure that you're not enslaved to your slide deck, right? Like, oh my gosh, I got 45 slides. You should never have 45 slides. Have like 4 or 5 slides, because the more slides you have, the more you are presenting to your slide deck than you are presenting to your audience. I think the biggest tip I would give was just to reinforce the idea is if you're giving a speech or a presentation, cut it into some intuitive segments. There's 3 segments, right? There's the opening, there's the big story and lesson, and then there's the moral and the closing or whatever it is. And then you kind of won't get lost. And even if you are, then you can kind of move on to the next section and, stretch it out if you have to. That helps me a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, we all suffer with death by PowerPoint sometimes from people who have tens and tens of slides. So I think that's wonderful to emphasize that point. So fantastic. Thank you. Fantastic. So moving on quickly, because I'm conscious of your time is very tight tonight, but human nature tends to believe there's a magic bullet, particularly when it comes to solving confidence problems. Would you agree in reality it needs to be a never-ending journey of self-development, commitment and persistence to maintain and retain confidence so you can deal with your situations and overcome the struggles? Would you agree that's the point? Never stop learning?
Well, other than penicillin and some vaccines, I don't think there's a magic bullet for anything. Confidence, you're exactly right, Dave, is a journey. And confidence, I find, usually comes from struggle. It comes from making mistakes and learning from them and being comfortable enough to share them. Disney fired me. My wife was mad at me yesterday. I over scolded my youngest son this morning, right? I mean, we're all on the same journey together. We all have actually fairly similar skills. I think it comes down to risk taking. Are you willing to take some risks that others aren't? I tell you, I still think there is not enough credit put to good old-fashioned hard work. I was on a podcast recently, Dave, and one of the host asked me, what did I think was a common denominator across all 30 of the mentors in my book, Master Mentors? And I said to him, hard work. And he took great offense to it. He's like, no, that's insulting. You're telling me if my dad would have just worked harder at selling vegetables off his truck for 30 years, he would have been more successful. I said, you know what? I don't know your dad, so I don't mean to offend you. I'm just telling you what I think. And I think hard work is what all these mentors have in common. So to answer your question, I think self-confidence is an outgrowth of hard work, of preparation, making mistakes, rehearsing, of getting up on stage and learning from your lessons and watching other people and the things that they do well and just copying them, right? Adopting those into your repertoire. I'll tell you, confidence and humility have a lot in common. I'm not a naturally humble person. I am a naturally confident person. Some might say arrogant. I hope not. But I think there is a reciprocity that exists, duality between confidence and humility. Confident people, I think, are capable of being humble. I'll tell you all about my challenges and why I was fired and why I was hired and why I was demoted and why this book didn't sell well and that book did sell well and why my Instagram is on fire and my TikTok's not, and what I'm doing wrong and doing right. And I'm quite comfortable. I'm very comfortable talking about my strengths and my weaknesses. And I think just when you're comfortable being vulnerable about your faux pas, your mistakes, your fears, your struggles, that naturally turns into some confidence. Channel your fears into confidence. Now, I hate sharks, I hate snakes, and I hate alligators. So I'm not going scuba diving to conquer my fear of sharks. I have my limits. I'm not going to skydive. I hate skydiving. So there's certain fears I have that I'm fine with. I don't plan to find myself being attacked by an alligator. Therefore, I'm not going to the swamp of Florida. But other fears that I have, other foibles and challenges, I'm very comfortable talking about them in the hopes to own them and almost make that mess my success.
Yeah, it's very refreshing to hear that. Really good insights there. Thank you for sharing those. Now, I said I'm very conscious of your time. Before I ask you one final question then, how would people learn more about you, follow you, discover more about your work, your teaching, your books? Where should they go and search for you on social media and such?
So I'm on every major platform: TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can also visit me at scottjeffreymiller.com. All my podcast episodes, my books, my Inc. magazine articles, blogs, they're all there as well. scottjeffreymiller.com.
Brilliant. And I highly recommend people to go and have a look because, as I said, you've got some incredible information to share with people. So one last question. So I believe you were invited to a weekly Zoom call by Marshall Goldsmith.
How did you know that?
Yeah. Well, I have listened to the old podcast or two. For other people, that's called the MG 100, I believe.
Yeah.
And these are some pretty astounding, accomplished leaders, 100 plus leaders, I believe.
Yeah.
So for most people attending a meeting of that kind of high caliber intelligence, that would be pretty darned intimidating and stressful. So for the less confident of us, what mindset, what preparations, what advice would you recommend in being able to deal with such an imposing, scary, terrifying event?
You have not exaggerated it, right? So the famous author, coach, speaker, Marshall Goldsmith has this group called the MG 100. It's probably the MG 150. I'm not quite sure how I got invited, but I kind of, snuck in the back door, and I'm part of this group now. And you're right. It's some of the biggest, most influential authors, speakers, CEOs in the world. We meet every Monday morning from 8 to 9 here Eastern time, 8 to 9, doesn't matter, in the US. It's a Zoom call and Marshall moderates it, and he has a topic for the day. And I'm in the presence of greatness. I mean, these are some of the biggest minds in the professional development world. And I've spoken twice, I think in 6 months. And by the way, I'm not too shabby, right? I mean, I was the chief marketing officer of a brand they all know. And I know I've had many best-selling books, and I've, been the beneficiary of a lot of mentors in my life, growing my brand. But I tend to listen a lot. He puts us into breakout groups, which is horrifying, twice during the phone call. And so I often I'll say, you know what, I'm going to pass. I'm just going to listen to you all. And again, I've got some chops in certain areas, but I'm mindful of when I'm talking just to sound smart and when I'm talking as I have some real experience and value to add. So I probably learned a lot about listening during this phone call. I'm a salesperson by nature. I was executive vice president of sales for many years. So I'm always in persuasion, influence, selling mode. I'm always speaking, and I need to be better at listening. And the Marshall Goldsmith calls gives me a great chance to listen more than I'm talking.
Brilliant. Well, that's been fantastic. I know you've got to shoot off now. So
thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much for your insights and inspiration. And I must say, this has been one of the delightful and a milestone moments in my podcasting career. So thank you very much.
I'm honored, Dave. Pick up a copy of Master Mentors. It's an easy breezy read. I also read the audiobook. If for some reason you need more of my voice, I read the audiobook as well. Can't imagine that person. And then look for Master Mentors Volume 2 coming out in the fall of 2022. 30 new insights, 30 new Master Mentors.
Fantastic. Well, have a great day, Scott. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, Dave.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.